You call the roll, please.
Councilmember Cochran. Here. Councilmember Gonzalez. Absent. Councilmember Hamrick.
Here.
Councilmember Jaquez. Absent. Councilmember Meisner.
Here.
Councilmember Turner. Absent. Mayor Pro Tem Smith.
Here.
Mayor Troutman.
Here. Absent again. Here. So this afternoon, actually, we are going to have a discussion on, the first item will be useful public service ordinance, and everybody got a copy of that ordinance. We got as a memo from our judge and from our prosecutor that said they were very much in favor of it. Silly me, I thought that was always a possibility that you could assign public service to people. Not that I've ever had that, but I understood that, I understood there was public service and the court assigned that. So is this something for the town or is it district, or would you comment on that? Or
Yeah, actually, I don't believe we've had the power to do that, or if we did, it was taken away at some point.
Okay.
So this would reenact the ability to assign useful public service work in lieu of or in addition to a sentencing for misdemeanors and other petty offenses.
Would there be a list of what those misdemeanors and other petty offenses, or is that up?
Well,
Just go ahead.
in talking with the city prosecutor, she was saying that really kind of depends on the defendant. And so if we had, she weeds through and makes sure that the right defendant would get those sentencing, because sometimes there's some that aren't good fits for that. So they want to make sure that if they're going out to provide community service, that they're committed to that, they're going to do a good job, and they're going to be reliable and work hard, relatively. And so it kind of depends more on the defendant and that agreement. Also, the subject really came up on the illegal dumping task force because we're looking for more volunteer work, and it's really hard to find volunteers. And so this is a way we can get those volunteers hours put in. And also for those who are doing illegal dumping, they can also participate in doing cleanups. And it's a good learning experience. And they can do certain projects, like if our city had a big cleanup, weekend, and they needed volunteers to supervise the dumpsters, she could specifically say, you need to work at this event at these times and be assigned to that. But there's also the flexibility where a defendant could have the freedom to take their paperwork to any nonprofit organization that they want to and get their service hours done there as well.
Okay, Mr. Meisner?
Don't the community agencies have to be signed up with a court in order to be eligible to receive those hours? They used to. We did.
So that's when we first met with Judge Allen. He was super eager about this, and it was sounding like it was going to be really complicated. But when I approached our attorney, Corey, to find out the details of it, is actually quite simple. And it really is as easy as them having the paperwork, going to the nonprofit, as long as the nonprofit's willing to give them somewhat good supervision, but not intense supervision, and document and sign that work was actually completed and done. The defendant's in charge of taking that paperwork and turning it in. And so and they have to pay the $5 to cover their insurance, and that's through SRSA, through the city. And so they said it's best to run it through the city so that it is open to all nonprofits. So Kyle Horn actually said there's potential that he could use some of those service hours, the BLM. The Gold Belt Tour is very excited at that prospect. They have a lot of concerns with a lot of illegal dumping and trash on those county roads on the Gold Belt Tour, and so there's lots of possibilities for using this.
You don't feel uncomfortable with that open of an arrangement? I guess my feeling was that I would almost like to see a menu of what those nonprofits are, or BLM in the direct district is probably nonprofit, but I don't know. I just felt that maybe it should be proactive in the organization.
Well, I think the judge and the prosecutor, it's not like a free-for-all. They work closely together. And so I think that there would be those conversations. If you don't want to do illegal dumping, okay, who are you going to work for? And they make sure that that's all legit. Our prosecutor does this in several other cities. She says it's very successful. They have very little problems. And it's something that she's very familiar with, and she's really involved in and a part of that solution finding for, like I said, to make sure that whatever that choice is that it is a good and appropriate fit for them and for the community as well.
Mr. Hamrick?
Mr. Mayor, we probably don't have a complete listing of all the offenses that we have listed in our codes, in the ordinances, but this does say misdemeanor, petty offense, or infraction. So it can be really anything for which a punishment can be imposed by the court. And so this would allow the substitution of community service for some other, a fine or some other type of punishment. And so we don't have that list, what are all the offenses, and we don't have a list of all the community organizations. But I think this will just develop over time. They'll start simple and get some relationships established, I'm sure, and as appropriate and necessary, expand from there if needed.
Yeah, and that conversation was kind of starting out simple and see how it goes. And from my impression is a majority of those doing the community service will probably be minors and younger folks' opportunity.
I don't think that's the case.
Not always, but there's a lot of them.
Does the county do this currently?
The county's looking in. I think the county has something set up, but I don't not know if they've been utilizing it.
Because when I was at the Humane Society, this was several years ago, but we had people come in
Right.
and volunteer. Well, they had to fulfill a certain amount of hours, and they would come in and do it there, so. And it worked well. I mean, it was,
That must be where all that's coming from, was the county court, not
Must be.
municipal court.
yeah.
Because I have
Okay.
a family member who, because of a water balloon display downtown, did a little time. I mean,
Well,
volunteered some of his time, yes.
we've had kids like ours.
Yes,
We've
I
had
think they were
community
together
service.
on that, by the way. Mr.
I was just going to say, as part of the insurance rider that we would have to add to our CIRSA insurance, we have to track which organizations they're doing the work for, the types of duties that they're doing. So over time, we can actually analyze that, and if you feel that there's something that's not appropriate there, we can work with the courts to make sure that the correct nonprofits are participating.
So perhaps, Ryan, you could take that as a task then, that maybe after 90, 180 days or some appropriate period, give us a little summary of how it's working, what's going on.
Sure.
Who's what, just some metrics that we can
Yeah.
take
So
a look at.
yeah. So at this point, we'll bring it back to a regular city council for a vote, assuming you don't have any amendments of the ordinance. And once we get it enacted and work with the court system, we can absolutely do an analysis after 120 days or so.
Okay. Are there any, it's pretty simple, any additions or changes you'd like to make
No,
at
I
this
think the
time?
clarification that I am at least interpreting is that this is regards to municipal court, and I'm familiar with county court.
Must be.
Correct.
Okay, anything else on that? Hearing none, let's move on to
Item B.
these. Item B, recreation/aquatic facility. Are you or Ms. Satori going to, Mr. Horn, who's going to take the lead discussion on this? Do you get to flip a coin, or
Guy in the Tiger Woods shirt.
do I?
I guess I can start. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion still going at this time as to what happens with a possible rec center. How do we replace a 53-year-old pool? How we provide the needs for the community, and do we look at possibly as community investing in a recreation center, knowing that could also be an economic driver that has been proven effective in other communities. I think that there's still a lot of questions to be answered as far as what the community wants. I think at the next steps, obviously, the citizens group needs to meet and look at the type of facility that we're looking at, because it has to be community-driven. It can't be led by the city or the rec district. I think we just walk hand in hand with them. But I think that there are some questions that have to be asked first, and before we can even discuss, I think, going to the voters, and I get questions, well, how much of a tax increase you're asking? I don't know. We don't know what the amenities are in the building. We don't know where the building's going to go. We don't know how large the building would be, the proposed building, and so we don't know what it's going to cost. And so without being able to answer those questions yet, it's kind of putting the cart before the horse and figuring out just how much. Now, granted, Do we look at the options of, hey, maybe we could afford, this is the cap. The cap is, I know on the high end was 40 million, but maybe the cap we say is 27 million, 30 million, 32 million, whatever that number is. Here's the cap that we believe that the city can work with, the county can work with, the rec district can work with, and then how do we subsidize it every year? I think that is, I think we have to be able to answer those questions before we can do a hard number, but at the same time, we have to go out and find from the community what it is they want. I think that there are public meetings coming up. The rec district is going to host one on August 6th at Canyon City High School in the Del Piso Performing Arts Center to try to find out what it is that the community wants, at least from the recreation district, and then let the citizens group, known as REC, Recreation Enhances Our Community, let them piggyback on that and then get feedback from the public on what it is they want. And I think that the community needs to talk with the members of REC, with you as city council members, with city staff, with rec district staff, with elected board members from the rec district, to find out what it is that they want. Now is the time to have the discussion. So we've kind of danced around it for a while. We had a feasibility study done, but now is the time where we need responses from the community. What do you want? And what do you want in the facility right now? If you could have it, what would it be? And then once you get that figured out, you can work with other organizations such as BRS, Barker Rinker CCAT. You can work with GE Johnson, and they can then do basically a mock-up of a design, figuring out what the square footage would be, how much it would cost, and then they can figure out what would work for the community. And now you have something then to sell the community on, something that we can discuss what that question would be. I still think there's probably two or three, there's two questions at least that have to be asked. One, to build it, which would be a sunset, and the second would be an operation budget that would happen every year. And that also could then work as you get to sustainability, that then works as your reserve for replacement costs down the road. So there are things that we can do to look at that. But then the other thing is we can look at then, once you have that question in place, you can go out and look at grants. Can you get a GOCO grant for an outdoor piece? Can you get DOLA money? Can you get maybe a grant from Daniels Fund or Gates Foundation or something along those lines to help maybe add to the project? I think Montrose did a great job because they added about $5 million to their project by going out and getting grants and seeking other funding that was leveraged with the tax question. So instead of a $26 million facility, they now have a $31 million facility. So there are ways that you can then leverage that. And the question I get asked is, well, if you get a grant, why can't the grant pay for the whole thing? Well, that's just not an option. Most grants are dollar for dollar, and then there are limits. So with some of these places like DOLA, it may be $1 or $2 million, but that's it. And then you've got to match it dollar for dollar, but you can use a successful tax question as leverage against it, and that can be your match, and that is acceptable for them. The only question is DOLA going to be looking at funding rec centers? Right now, they're not. That could change in a matter of months. As they get into the 2020 calendar, they may say, no, we're looking at rec centers now. Right now, they're not. But if we have a winning project, it's something that they can get on board with. But as John Hamrick has heard me say at a couple of presentations, I've been very clear about that. You have to have a winning project, because if you put together a losing effort, meaning you can't say where it's going to go and you can't answer the people's questions, then it's not going to work. You're just throwing election money away. So the way we look at it is, now we have to get data from the citizens, get their information. We already have the feasibility study data. Now we get into the nuts and bolts. What does the community want? We then can start to design something, then give them something tangible where they can get behind, whether it's a winning project, and then we can continue to tweak it. But I think that's the part that we're at now. So we have to get public feedback, which I think makes REC's role essential. The rec district is not looking to lead this. We're just looking to work with them. If the rec district is going to be the one that does in cooperation with the city and the county, RFPs, and we're the contracting agent, not a big deal. That's something that we can look at. But before we get to that, we need to know that, of course, we're moving forward, and it's something that the city, I know rec district staff would like to look going forward, but I think a lot of it hinges also on the citizens group. And it's not to put pressure on them, it's just, that's where this needs to be right now. And so that's a thought of the rec district. And just food for thought for the rest of the community, we had 209 swimmers at the Ichabod Pool. If anybody drove by there on Saturday and Sunday, the place was absolutely hopping. If you don't think that revenue isn't brought into the town by a swim meet, I would say you didn't go to Ichabod Pool. Because a lot of those people were staying in hotels, eating in restaurants, going to the gas stations. There is an economic impact. Now imagine being able to do something like that also in the winter. I was at one at Cheyenne Mountain High School where there were probably about 400 swimmers. And it's just, it's packed. So are there revenue opportunities? There are. A rec center, we believe, would provide some, let's just say, fill in some missed opportunities for the community, whether it's being able to use a facility year-round, giving us more options, because the facilities that we use with the school district are definitely used well between their programs and rec district programs, and they are our largest partner right now. And so it takes some pressure off the school district as well, which would be good, but the school district that could then utilize it, the public could utilize it. And, there was an interesting article done in Colorado Springs on price points and rec centers, and what is the role of a rec center, and what is the role of, of service to the community. Pueblo, and I'll tell you right now, our pool will not finish in the black this year. So if somebody goes, well, you got to be able to show that you can finish in the black at least and be sustainable. I will tell you right now, there is not a public pool in southern Colorado that finishes in the black. There's not one. There's something being subsidized by someone from somewhere. City of Florence had the half-cent sales tax, so they've got a nice reserve set up, and they do a wonderful job with their pool. Pueblo subsidizes $450,000 annually for their pool. Colorado Springs charges between $8 and $12 a person to get into a pool, and that's through the YMCA, $8 to $12, whereas most public pools are $5 and under. We're at $450 for kids, and we're looking at cutting that for the rest of the season. So you've got to have the right price point, but there are two public pools that make money, Pirates Cove and Waterworld. Those are your two that make money, and they're dependent on weather. If the weather is bad, which, by the way, we did not have great weather this year, especially in June, it'll be interesting to see how they do. But at the same time, it's a service. We will not finish in the black, and that's why having something to subsidize the pool or a fund to subsidize a rec center is necessary. We don't have that. We have to subsidize through our general fund. We don't have a specific fund that can subsidize the pool. We did, but it's gone. There's no money left. So we're having to subsidize through the general fund, which brings Tabor issues into play because the pool is an enterprise fund. So we have a lot of work to do there to figure out how we're going to do it, how we're going to make sure that we're meeting Tabor guidelines and some other things. So there are some things that we have to work through between now and when we finalize the budget. But it's no different than a rec center. How are we going to fund it? How are you going to subsidize it? Because it is not going to be 100% sustainable right off the bat. We can get close. Montrose has proven that. Durango has proven that. Gunnison. But there is some subsidy that will be involved. So, I don't say that to burst people's bubbles, but the reality is if it could be done through private business, my guess is there would already be a rec center in this community. There'd be a privately run rec center in Montrose before they built one in Grand Junction, where they're looking to build one and they can't get it passed. Ironically, they went out and hired as their new director Ken Sherbino from Montrose. And so I'm assuming that one of the reasons he's there is to get a rec center built in Grand Junction, and they couldn't find a better guy to do it. Wonderful, wonderful individual who knows how to get people to buy into a vision. But we, as a community, it's going to be our job to sell it and to get people behind it. And it has to get unanimous support, I think, from all the government agencies, in order for people to get behind it. So there is some pressure there. But Now's the time to have the conversation. We can't dance around it anymore. It's either go or no go. But now's the time to have the conversation that we've got an old pool. They guaranteed that within 3 years, we'd spend close to $50,000. I hate to tell you this, that $50,000 coming up quick. We had 4 mechanical issues. One of them is about a $20,000 fix that we need to address this off-season. We're already there. And that's just to keep it functioning for the short term. That's the Band-Aid. If we want the full fix, and it's an outdoor facility, now you're looking into the millions and millions of dollars. But we're there at that figure that they assumed, and we're like, okay, well, we got 3 years. No, we had 1. We got 1. We don't have 3. So our board gets to decide how we continue to Band-Aid this thing. So that's kind of where we're at. Don't mean to do doom and gloom or anything else. I'm just giving you the facts.
Okay, Ms. Cochran?
So I know you had talked about doing a public forum. Obviously, we still need to do some sort of survey as well. In a perfect world, would you like to see that survey go to Canyon City residents, Fremont County residents? I mean, what kind of a demographic are we
Well,
looking
right
at?
now, for the purposes of the feasibility study, it was done through the rec district boundaries.
Okay.
But there's 2 things on this survey, because if there's 2 questions, so again, we haven't decided how the tax question gets worded. Okay, let's say it's a county tax, then we need to do a county survey. If it's a city tax, we need to do a city survey on the bond issue. If it's a rec district, then we need to use the rec district boundaries. If there's a combination of the 2, which I think it probably needs to be a combination, 2 of the 3 need to figure out how that's going to work. The one that keeps coming up the most is a city sales tax and a property tax through the rec district. That's the one that seems to have the most traction. Whether or not that's the one that's palatable to the voters, that's yet to be determined. But hypothetically, if you went that route, you'd have to ask a question for city voters, and then you would also have to do a survey using the boundaries of the recreation district. So you're looking at 2 surveys, because there would be 2 questions. Myself, I don't live in the city. I can throw a rock from my house into city property, but I don't live in the city. So I'm at a point where I'm not going to get to vote unless my street gets annexed in. I'm not going to get to vote for a tax question in the city. Now, I will get to do one for a tax question in the rec district. But so you have to keep that in mind when we're doing it. So you're looking at 2 different groups. So that's going to have to go out that way. Now, if you get the county involved, now you're looking at asking questions that benefit Rockville, Williamsburg, Coal Creek, Penrose, Cotopaxi, Howard, Tallahassee Road. You're looking at a much larger area. And there's some different risk there, because now you're asking a user in Howard, hey, would you use the rec districts, or would you use the counties or whoever's rec center? And would you guys be willing to drive 45 minutes to go use it? For some people, that's an easy answer. For others, they may go, no. Now, we do have people that live in Cotopaxi that participate in rec district programs that do make the drive for that. We have others that don't. They go to Salida. So there are other options out there. So we just need to decide what would be the best. But we'd have to look at a survey, multiple surveys. But again, a lot of that, I think, is going to be driven by some of the data that rec gets back also from public forums and gets feedback from. SurveyMonkey would also be another good way to do it. Some simple 5-question things. What do you want? How many bodies of water do you guys think would work?
So then would you be interested in waiting until after you have that forum to do a survey, or does it matter?
I am. I mean, the
Okay.
forum is, what, two weeks away?
Just get a better
3 weeks.
idea.
I don't have a calendar in front of me. It's obviously, I think right now, I think waiting is not going to hurt us, but I think that would be a good time to then discuss with the public some survey options, and then get some feedback at the community. But I think the more feedback that rec gets, the better off it's going to serve all of us.
Okay, Mr. Hamrick?
what I would like to do a little bit is dialogue, so that we can both kind of talk back and forth here a little bit. But
Yes, sir.
But the city has done this for the roads, okay? And one of the reasons that it was, I believe that the 2A tax initiative was successful is you could have a pretty well-defined problem. And here we don't have the problem defined, except we don't have a rec center, or we're not going to have a pool. The difference is that for the roads, we knew how many miles of roads need to be fixed. We knew what the cost was. And so cost was known. What we were going to do, what had to be done to fix the roads. Without cost being known, it's kind of like you asking, saying, hey, John, what kind of car would you like to drive? Well, Rolls-Royce, Bugatti, Ferrari, those brand names come to mind. But and that's the problem with trying to ask the public or poll the public is, what do you want? Well, gee whiz, let's start listing all the things we want. But the point is that there needs to be, you need some way, and it's kind of a Gordian knot, I realize, of how do you get to a cost without knowing what people want, and how do you find out people what they want without knowing the cost? And so it's tough.
Well, I think that the method that has been used has been effective in that you use the feasibility study as a starting point, and you have an idea of what everybody wants in the facility, or what the community based on data would go in. Now we ask the people. It's no different, I think, than looking at the Centennial Park Plan when you guys did that, or looking at a river corridor master plan or something along those lines. It's, here are some possibilities. Now let's talk to the public. What do you like? What do you not like? What do you want in it? Is there something in it that is not here? What do you want in it? Then you can start to dial that in. Then you can meet with people, and you can come up with a number. The number will be known. It's just we don't know it this second. Now, 3-4 months from now, we may know what that number looks like. I apologize. My phone's going off. So we know what that number would look like maybe months from now. But right now, we don't know. It's hypothetical. Right now is where you get feedback. Okay, 2 bodies of water, a lap lane, and a leisure pool, some slides for the aquatics. Okay, gym. What do you want? Do you want 3 gyms? Do you want 2 gyms? Do you want just 1 court? Do you want a rock climbing wall in it? Yes or no? How many locker rooms are we looking at? Do we want a space for seniors? Do we want this other stuff? Once we answer those questions and we get feedback from the public, now we can start to put a number on it and say, look, this is what it would be. This is what this would cost. And then we could then say, okay, here's a second version that maybe you say is a little cheaper, and you say, here's a second version. Which one can you get behind? Now we have something to sell them. So it isn't going to be any different than the roads. We have to do research, we have to do data, we have to get feedback, we have to get survey results back. Then we can get to a hard number to give to the people. That's a winning project. So that's why I'm saying when people come up and ask me, well, what would be in it, where would it go? We don't know the answers yet. We're just having those initial discussions. But one of the first things we need now is, now we have the feasibility study, what do the people want?
If I could just chime in for a minute here, one of the things that I'd like to see done, and it is tough to know what comes before what, because we're talking about an RFP telling us how we will possibly pay for this, but we need to know what the amount is that people are willing to spend on it, what's reasonable for this area, right? The feasibility study, I think, gave us a good starting point and a rendering, an example of a rendering of what a facility could possibly look like. An activity that I would like to do is take a large rendering around to different organizations here beginning real soon, and do a little activity with them where they actually participate in, putting a sticky note up there and giving some feedback. What do they like? What do they not like? What's missing that we didn't think of or the feasibility study didn't address? Who do people see as unnecessary? And start gathering that data just on a real-time, basis in small groups. I think sometimes when I do want to be a part of these big meetings, these big public meetings too, but I think it's important to meet with the smaller groups because you could ask questions, you could have dialogue, they could really understand where you're coming from versus it feeling like a presentation. And so we do want to be part of some of the different things coming up, but I also think that, you know, having that visual, people don't have a lot of time or attention span anymore, and so having that visual and actually doing an activity, you know, and amongst our citizens committee, I think, you know, splitting that up and really going out to organizations who we may have a relationship with, you know, and trying to get around to as many people as possible. I did meet with the downtown merchants last week in their monthly meeting and just kind of stopped in. Right now what we're seeking is more community business leaders that may want to join the committee and really be a part of that, because we do see that if it goes to a sales tax, we want them to understand the benefit that this kind of a project will have on businesses in town. And we know that a sales tax in Canyon City is a very bad word, right? And we got some of that response, I think, from the meeting, but it was very, you know, casual, just saying, hey, we want you to be a part of this as we decide the best way to go forward. We have enlisted a few more business owners to join the committee and people who are really excited about this project. And we have a whole bunch that we're kind of holding off from getting involved, you know, until it's time to really start putting boots on the ground. We did take some time as a group to pull back and kind of adopt, you know, kind of pull together again, pull away from the governmental agencies for just a bit and really solidify what our vision is. And we talked about that elevator statement that as we're going out and visiting with friends, family, and so on, we all have a similar message. It doesn't have to be exactly what you see on the back of the page there, but that we know that, hey, these are the things that, you know, we're really talking about in the community. So that took a little bit of time to get all on the same page. And as we add more people to the citizens group, we kind of have to review, right? This is where we were, this is where we plan to go. I've also been meeting with a lot of people who still feel like, hey, can we get this privately done? How do we do this? And the message really is it would have been done already likely. However, simultaneous to all the work that we're doing, I think we are absolutely open to seeking any kind of sponsorship, anything that would take whatever that number is that we're looking at and decrease that. Ryan talked to us about a program that the business owners could be a part of, and would you just speak to that for a moment?
Yeah, there's enterprise zone contribution projects. So there's Canyon City, most of Fremont County is an enterprise zone. So they're you know, when you set up a contribution project, people can donate to it, and on top of the regular tax break that they get from doing a donation to a nonprofit, there's an additional break that they get on top of their Colorado state taxes. So, you know, there's a contribution project can receive up to about $700,000 a year in donations as part of that project. So, you know, if there was a capital campaign towards this project, you could start offsetting some of this cost if there were people donating.
Mr. Meisner?
I have a number of questions. Do I ask one at a time or all?
How big of a number is it?
That's
Go
confidential.
ahead. Go ahead. Fire away.
Are you familiar with the polling that District 60 is doing in terms of trying to determine the District 60?
I am.
They're trying through the polling process to fix a number to their current bond project.
Correct.
They started at 300 million. I think they're now down to 240 based upon the information from those polls, which seems to be a little bit of a different approach, but they're trying to let the people determine how much you're willing to spend, aside from what the project is, how much you want to spend. I think that has some validity to it. You had mentioned the impact from the swim meets. I would suggest that somebody start gathering that information and making some, however you want to call it, balance sheets or whatever, to actually make that information available so that people can see those dollars in terms of exactly what's happening with a particular swim meet, in terms of what the impact is on restaurants and hotels, so that people are looking at real dollars. I would do the same thing with your current pool. Unfortunately, sometimes when you say we're not going to finish in the black, a certain element is questioning why that is happening. And again, I realize that's a public budget, but at the same point in time, I think that budget for the pool, in terms of those actual expenses that are going on, should be part of your presentations in terms of that being very transparent.
It is.
I'm going to say something. I've not committed to reelection, but relative to capital support for that public pool, I think you'd at least need to consider putting some kind of proposal together to council to get some support for some of that capital expense to maintain that public pool in the interim. That may be an option that council would entertain. I don't know, but you at least need to consider that. And then you mentioned some meetings. One of the things that's in the past that's been very successful is to make for sure that those meetings are happening with those community organizations. Yeah. Those people are a driving force in the community, particularly relative to sales tax. And if you can survive some of those meetings, that's the beginning of the road to success.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that. I think that really is where we need to go. Putting that stake in the ground and really having a solid, yes, this is exactly where we'll have the center, if it, comes to fruition, is so important. Probably even more important than what will be in it, because I could bring the example rendering and we could work through some different ideas, but knowing where you're going to put it, that's going to make a difference to people on whether they're going to support this or not. And so, I think doing a survey that would be pretty comprehensive to get some of that initial feedback is important. Formal survey and also informal surveying, just on Facebook and all of the different social media venues that people use, not to mention in these groups that we go to speak to, having a simple survey. So, maybe it's not the scientific version, but it's a pretty real life example of, what a lot of people will support. I'd like to see that done. I'd also like to, when we do decide on a number, whether it be 25 million, or however much it is, I'd like to have several architects take a look at that and say, here's kind of what you're wanting, here's the amount, this is what I could give you for that amount, rather than just having, maybe one opinion on that. So that's another important step, I believe.
Okay, Ms. Smith?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions as well. Just for the record, I recently did go car shopping, and I really, really wanted a convertible Mustang.
Did you get it?
But I had to have a car that I could carpool with,
You could do that
and
with a
that I could
Mustang.
pay cash for. So it ended up with a used Pathfinder without a sunroof.
I see where you're going with
Yeah.
this, Ashley, already.
And so maybe in your questions and the what do you want? Do you want a pool? Well, maybe if we can get some of those numbers, would you like a leisure pool for $15 million? Would you like basketball courts for $5 million? Would you like, and have a price tag associated? So that's part of the education piece of that. All these things come with a cost. And the same question also, what is palatable? How much are you willing to pay?
I actually love that
And those
idea.
taxes.
I think even on a sticky note could have the costs of the different elements, so as they're, physically putting them on that rendering, they could understand. And that
what
could
it
really
is.
increase public awareness, because when people hear 25 million, 40 million, they go, oh my God, it just seems so unimaginable. They feel like they could build an entire community for that amount, the reality of what things cost now and what they'll cost a few years from now.
Mm-hmm.
It's difficult to have people understand that.
And just to be clear, when a facility is built in this community, if a facility is built, you are not going to pay what a Canyon City rate would be or a Fremont County rate. You're going to pay probably a premium, because your companies that design these facilities and build these facilities do not live in our area. They're going to be coming from Denver. They could be coming from out of state. You might get lucky and find somebody in Colorado Springs, but you pay a premium. It is actually, according to some of the people we've talked with, probably more expensive to build in Canyon City than it would be to build in Denver, because you are bringing crews in that have to specialize in certain equipment. This is not building a home, and we have some wonderful home builders in this community. This is building a recreation center, a very specialized structure. You have to keep that in mind. We are going to pay the same rate that you would pay to build something if you built it in Breckenridge. And I know that sounds crazy to people that would be, that may be reading this in the paper or something like that, but we are not going to get a low-cut rate because our community happens to maybe not be as economically strong as a Breckenridge or something in Summit County or Eagle County or Denver or Boulder. It's all based on your location and the state that you're in. And you have to remember that when we're going forward. It's a state rate, not a local rate.
Okay, so I have 2 more questions, if that's
Yes, go
okay.
ahead.
And maybe, Ryan, you can be a participant in the answer. And when do you anticipate that we would need to start putting out an RFP for the actual market study?
I think probably as soon as possible. I think, we probably need to work on that RFP and get it out in the next few weeks.
So does the community or the rec support that?
Yeah.
That it's time to start getting a RFP prepared?
I believe so. And we could pull back together before I speak on behalf of everyone because it's been a little bit just to solidify that answer. I don't want to be the only one speaking for that group. We have talked about it. We've kind of went back and forth. I think the fear that comes from that is we do want all of that information, and we understand somewhat the scientific value of that, of course. But 3 years into a project where we are getting a lot of outside support, we're concerned that a few amount of people could put a stop to this whole project if that doesn't come back exactly as hoped for. But we realize that that's part of that process too,
Oh, we have to face the tough answers
Speaking-
too.
Oh, absolutely.
Speaking for the Rec District Board, our board at the last board meeting was very clear on where they're at. And that is, they want to know where rec is and where they're at in the process and what information they have and where they're at before they want to go forward with the RFP. They want to know exactly where things are at. And so that could be answered by the August meeting. That can be answered quickly. But our board didn't say, no, we're ready to go out right now. They said, we want to see where rec's at. We want to know exactly where they stand, where the public is, then send out the RFP. They want to make sure that this project is moving forward before
Sure.
we do the RFP.
And I guess I'm kind of anticipating that it takes time to prepare for that RFP. It takes time to solicit the RFP. It takes time
It
to hire
does.
the firm. And then they have to go through and start doing the question, developing the scientific questions to ask. And if we can schedule on our side to get all those, your community focus,
Public
your big ones
meetings.
and your public pieces taken care of. So
Yeah.
when it's time to get together to get those questions, then that would be an efficient use of our time.
I like that plan. I think that's where I've been a little bit stuck as to which one comes first, but if we could simultaneously be working on that side of it while we are beginning to speak to the public, again, not having those solid answers, makes it tough. The where, the how much, and those things. I would like to just address Mr. Hamrick's, you talked about the roads and the reason that passed is because that you really identified the need that was publicized, and we all face that need every single day as we travel around, right? Just want to draw your attention to the statements in the vision statement. A lot of these were actually pulled from the very first couple community meetings that we held 3 years ago, where we really did invite 50 different entities to come in and brainstorm what are the needs of the community. And so the feasibility study looked at some of those as well, but I think these are even more realistic when we have representation from, the law enforcement or the prison workers in our area saying, these are the things we need. We need a place to train for our people to train and to bring their families to have fun. Same thing from the folks who work at the prison going, yeah, gosh, do you know how many of my coworkers work out of town and drive in because we don't have something like this in our community? Those are things that need to be considered. So as we were working through this, we really considered a lot of the input that was given to us in the primary stages of just seeking out what is needed, not only in the facility, but more so in the programming. What does the community need to be healthier and more economically stable? So,
Have you considered another ballot point, that a community recreation center can also be a tool for recruiting and retaining good employees and prospective businesses and economic development.
Absolutely. That's on there somewhere.
It
And I
is,
did have one final question, and Ryan, I think maybe you can help. You alluded to needing to be really shovel-ready, being able to have that vision, stakes in the ground of the reality of what this project really will be. And as far as the Abbey property, have there been any progress in the answer if we can obtain the 10 to 15 acres separate from there? And
Yeah, I think, when you're talking about the Abbey property, it's a very fluid situation. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, and with their ownership group and prospective businesses that they're talking to. From an economic development standpoint, every group that has approached their ownership group, I have let them know that we would be interested in discussing acquisition of property. So I think as some of those, and I'm scheduled to get an update tomorrow on some of those projects. So I'll have a better idea tomorrow where some of that sits.
okay.
Mr. Hamrick?
Thank you. I want to kind of touch on 4 ideas. The high school, FEDC, the county, and likely voters. The one thing that we found in various times where we've tried to poll the public is we've tried to do a scientific poll to get an accurate representation of residents in the city. Residents in the city don't necessarily vote. And so don't forget, if you're going to be talking ballot questions, the people, the base, whatever the political boundaries of that base is, needs to be likely voters. Okay?
Correct.
I don't know if you remember, but I think it was 8 or 9 years ago, the FEDC did a community meeting at the Abbey where they had, I think it was like 120 people, something like that, there in the Abbott's room. And the idea of the meeting was to help define where are the areas that we can make progress, economic progress here in the county. And what they did is they had different breakout sessions, and they had the participants in each breakout session, write on sticky notes. They eventually aggregated the sticky notes into different areas on the windows of the room, and then published the results of that finding. And that was very helpful in getting a cross section. And in that case, they were really focused on the business community, but it was a pretty good meeting, and it was pretty good results, actually. On the high school, have you talked to the high school about acquiring some of their property for a pool? I know they did that in Woodland Park. I know they had some unique circumstances where that worked out pretty well, where the high school actually donated property to the pool in exchange for some considerations and swimming lessons for the students and things like that. But that would be something I would think that you'd need to do. And the last thing, the county, right now do you guys know how interested the county is in participating? That's kind of a loaded question. I mean, that we don't have a county representative here.
Yeah, you'd have to ask them, but I can say this: they've been active at the meetings that we've been involved in. It's not like they've shot things down. I think they've been open to different things. I think they've also been very honest about their attention being at Pathfinder Park right now in the fairgrounds, and that's fine. It can't all be about a rec center or a pool or something else. I mean, there are other issues going on in the community and in the county. So, but they've been engaged, they've been active. And the question is, would they be willing to put a tax question on? I don't know. You'd have to talk with them. But then again, if you do, that brings into a different setup on how you structure the rec center, fee-wise, participation-wise. It changes the game. So there are a lot of things that we would have to look at. But I think that's a question for them. And the good news is whenever we've had an RFP, they've been engaged and involved and had representatives at the table. I think the one thing that hasn't happened was REC was not at the table, and I think that we've all agreed that that changes now. REC will have a seat at the table as we go forward with the RFPs, with everything else, because they're in a lot of ways, they're the ones that are representing the people, and they have to be the ones leading it, so they have to be at the table, and that is changing effective, about a week ago when we met. So, and I don't think the county would have any issue with that at all. Obviously, with 2 county commissioners out of state for a while at a conference, it's been tough to get with them, but it's something we will be talking with them, I'm sure. But they've been active.
Mr. Meisner?
A couple of things I want to reiterate. I think you could ease some of your concerns or open your eyes to some realities if you were to have a session with the Rotary group. That's an outstanding group that will definitely let you know the feeling of Canyon City relative to taxes and expending public monies and their monies. It's a very fair group, but that group can really provide you with the opportunity to hone your skills. I think the size of the location is critical because it impacts some of the things that council can do behind the scenes in terms of potential opportunities that we have. And some of those opportunities aren't necessarily initially available for public discussion. So some of those discussions we have to have in executive sessions in terms of potential opportunities that would become available. And if we knew that we needed 10 acres, 12 acres, 7 acres, 15 acres, that could help council make some decisions that sometimes have to be made very quickly.
I believe it was a recommended 10 acres on the feasibility study.
The feasibility study was, correct. They were looking at 10, and I know that the number's been as high as 15, but
Right.
if you're really looking at 10, 15 acres, there's only a handful of locations
If that.
in this community that can fit that.
Right.
And we know that the Abbey is one of them. Obviously, there's Oddfellows. There is some rec district property. That means moving dog park, moving archery range, moving a lot of other stuff. But when we looked at it, that's one of the reasons the Abbey was very effective, because you really look at a map of Canyon City and you look at the satellite photo and then actually see how much land there is
Right.
available. There's not a lot.
And then my final thing is, I think you'll be surprised at the response that you would get from the Rotary Club with your list of goals here or visions, because that group will look at this entirely differently than what this group is looking at it. And personally, I think we're spending too much time trying to decide what size of facility we need. We need to identify the size of that facility, the cost, and start moving forward. We can spend the next year and a half trying to pull this and pull that and determine what size of facility we need and how much it's going to cost. But the bottom line is, you can't talk intelligently to people until you know the cost and the size of the facility and what they're going to get. So you need to get that information squared down as soon as possible. And it's not going to be a $42 million facility, I don't believe. Now, you guys can believe that, but
We don't.
you're probably in that 20 range, somewhere in there in terms of what's practical and what you could potentially sell to the taxpayers of this community.
Amongst city council, I know there's been conversation about if I were to support this, this would be a max possibly of what I would support. Can you tell us what that number is?
No, because you need to tell me what you want. I mean, that's what I'm wanting, is we keep playing this game with, what do you want to do here, what do you want to do there? You people need to decide, this is what we're going to build, this is what it's going to cost, now let's go for it. We're spending the last year and a half, 2 years, trying to decide what size of facility and what's it going to cost. And we still are from 21 to $42 million.
Well, I
We
think
need to get
it
that
is
nailed.
helpful when you're making decisions to know what your budget is in the beginning, so you can be in that, somewhat in that realm. If I remember our conversation before, it seemed like a lot of the council members would support a 3% increase in sales tax. I know that Ryan's had some creative solutions that might help with make that even lower. So I think it would be probably in that realm from the sales tax point of view. So then it falls to the Parks and Rec District on where the comfort lies for increasing the property tax for long-term sustainability. I think another success for the 2A was that there was a sunset on that sales tax, and I think that's probably going to be the same. It seems like sunsets are essential to passing taxes.
I don't know that you
easily.
can compare this to 2A. 2A was a realistic, practical need that everybody that drove a vehicle understood the reality of the problem. The problem you have is you need to convince a large number of people in this community that this is of value to the community. And it's not like a pothole. That was easy, comparatively. I mean, it was an easy problem.
$167 million easy problem? I think rec center sounds like a good deal.
You didn't have to explain to people what the problem was and what the need was.
Okay.
But you don't have that advantage here, I don't believe.
Okay, any other comments? I'd like to go toward an ending of some kind. Three of the largest employers in our town are federal, state prison, and hospital. Do you think any of those would be players? They seem to be, more than ever that I've been around, willing to talk to us. This is the first time that I can ever remember we got together on a monthly basis with both the state prison system and the Federal Bureau of Prisons. They realize, as you and I do, that every time at 4 o'clock or whenever they shift change, a lot of cars go east.
Yep.
And I believe that this could be an integral part of getting those people back.
The St. Thomas More Foundation did donate money in the beginning for the feasibility study. They were absolutely on board and excited. But I think we need to, reach further than the foundation. And, there's different grant funding that comes, from health and wellness too, between the insurance companies that, want to prevent costs from going up. There's some programs for that, as well as, there is a St. Thomas or a Centura Health YMCA, combination there on I-25 heading up to Denver. So there's definitely opportunities for partnership there. As far as reaching out to, head of prisons, that gets a little bit tricky between federal and state, but I absolutely agree with you that we have got to get to those people and really help them understand how this could benefit them, as far as having their employees, not only the driving back and forth, but just the mental health and wellness that is needed in those types of jobs.
Mayor, we do have a big house meeting, I believe, next week. It might be a good opportunity to bring that subject up.
And that we have had some very good meetings and with large audiences, 30 and more people that are all associated with both the federal and the state and looking for a discussion of what's happening in our community. So that avenue has opened greatly here in the last year or two, that I would invite you to come along. Now, you have to be cleared so you can get through the gate and get back out, by the way.
Yeah.
But
Let me know when it is. I'll be there.
well, I think, what?
They need a plan.
Probably. No, we have it
Is it 20?
25th, I believe.
the 25th.
25th.
I have
Yeah.
down the 25th
4 p.m.
at the federal. Yeah, so I don't have any problem with you going with me, but someone's going to have to get cleared to get into the federal prison. I'm assuming none of you have spent time there. Okay.
Do we have to get cleared? I didn't
Should
think we
be
had
all
to
right.
get cleared to that one.
To get through the gate
No, because we went to the visiting center.
at the federal, this is supposed to be at the federal prison
Right.
in Florence.
You don't have to
Okay.
be pre-cleared.
Just tell me
Okay.
you're visiting.
Okay.
Ryan, do you think that would be acceptable if someone would like, or is that too?
Is it too soon for you, or, yeah, we're meeting monthly now, aren't we?
Pretty much.
It may be better to, if
Plan
you are
for the-
meeting
plan for
monthly,
the
to give us a
August.
month to get some of these things underway. I'd like to have as much clarity as possible when
I
I'm going
agree.
out
Need
talking to people.
something in hand,
Yeah.
because these are doers.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, it's all with the
It's my kind of people.
great get-together we had, of course, sponsored by the City of Canyon City, and it was over 450 people showed up.
That's great.
I think there's a renewed interest in being community active.
Yeah.
So I think that'd be a good point, so. Okay, any other questions, or, I guess, where do we go from here? One of them is your meeting for rec, right? And do we have, should I appoint someone of council to be on your committee?
What
Hey.
time is
Or
that
not.
meeting on the 6th?
We're going to start it at 6 o'clock, so it'll be the presentation I've been giving around the community on the rec district, and basically what ends up happening is that kind of eventually morphs into a discussion in the Q&A session on a rec center pool replacement, which then we can then turn it over to rec and
That's
just sit in the audience.
That's at the high school.
Correct.
And how are you promoting?
We'll be doing it, social media, press releases, website. We'll probably put out information to cities, see if you guys can help us spread the word
Yeah, we
and
can-
go from there.
Yeah.
Maybe the
Some
Daily
morning line,
Record
maybe?
would put something.
I'm sure the Daily Record, I'm sure I can get Carl and Michael to give us a little help.
Well, you need to also talk to Chrissy Gotham, who does our,
Right.
Well,
Is that
she
okay?
very easily, she prefers if you're doing a social media post that she shares yours because it helps with the traction of it.
That's
So,
perfectly
yeah.
fine. We can always, we will be doing a post, getting it up if I'm actually going on vacation tomorrow, so it depends on how quick I can get things done. So it may have to wait till I get back on the 25th, but that still gives us essentially 12 days to promote this and get it out there. So we will start on that.
you get time off there too, huh? Pretty good deal.
Every now and then, they let me have some time off. I get a little lucky.
Good.
I'll reach out to the committee, the citizens group, and see if we could get together next week possibly to game plan a little bit, following this meeting. I will invite Ryan, Ashley, and Dina, who's been in the loop to this point, but it's kind of been intermittent, so I'll make sure that all three and anyone else who wants to be on that email has notification of that time too.
Okay. But again, I would strongly encourage you to head toward Pick'em. Pick something that is promotable dollar-wise, and your idea of stickers and stuff, that's true. Maybe they could embellish it from there,
Yeah.
but something to start with.
My understanding was the RFP would provide some of that information, but I could be very naive in that process too. So I think that's what the holdup's been a little bit too, is what, the survey, not the RFP, the survey coming from the RFP, that, that is what we were waiting for those numbers. If it's up to us just to decide on what we think is good and go for it, I guess we could do that too, but that wasn't,
Yeah, that's why we have to start on the RFP now,
Yes.
so we can get all those finalizations. So Dina's here.
Go ahead.
Are you the writer of the RFP?
Yeah, I think we need to pull the RFP that was, Dina worked so hard on in the beginning, and go through it and get it completed and get it out.
Sounded like it just needed a little bit more time for turnaround
Yeah.
for the companies, and then, yeah, awesome.
Okay?
Let's do it.
Very
I
good.
realize it's challenging to actually put your hand on something and move forward with it. But I'm just going to say it again. You need to grasp something, affix a dollar value it, and go with it. Or we're going to be here next year still trying to decide whether we're at 21 or 42.
Right.
Yeah. And just so everybody's to know, especially with the RFP, remember all these companies that thought it was too tight of a turnaround, they're already working on projects leading up to a November election this year. So we're going to have to keep that in mind as we submit this out. Some people may not be able to get back to us as quickly as we want. So we're going to have to keep that, we're going to have to be aware of that as far as the time frame is concerned, because we are coming up on November elections. And there are some big ones, a real big one not too far down the road from here.
Okay. Any final words?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Before we leave, though, I want to go ahead and, on July the 9th, one of our employees, a longtime employee, Henry Dale Nordlow,
Yep.
passed away. And I would like to send out our sympathy to the family, first of all, for their loss, but also loss from our town. This individual, this gentleman, Henry, was a worker for us. He did a great job for our town. And again, we thank them for allowing us to have him to be here as an employee, and our sympathy goes to that family. And I just want them to know that. So thank you. Okay, we're done.